So this is the Kundalini Awakening podcast, and it's our second one with Lawrence Edwards. Just a reminder, Lawrence is a well-known author and speaker and teacher when it comes to Kundalini awakening, spiritual awakening. And today our topic is about the more external outward journey of Kundalini and spiritual awakening. You might use the word activism, you might say socially engaged spirituality. But what we want to discuss is what is a bigger picture of spiritual awakening and how can we bring it into the world as we go through our journey. So Lawrence, I'm going to hand it over to you and just ask you, in your experience and in your journey, how did you get into entering a more socially engaged spirituality? Is there a journey? Can you give some examples? Anything that springs to mind?
Sure. Well, great to be with you. Thank you for having me back. And yeah, for me, the journey has been both, we talked about it some last time. Some of my experiences started as a very small child. And so I didn't have a separate sense of, oh, I'm coming to spirituality now. To me, spirituality sort of enveloped my life and the unfolding of these, transcendent realms and experiences. But part of what kept me grounded was I was interested in what's going on in the world. So even by the time I got to university and I became sort of a political activist standing up, against racism, against the war, involved in the anti-war movement, these were to me just natural expressions of being attuned to, wait a minute, we're not living these ideals, ideals that had become real to me through direct experiences and through by the time I started university, I was already starting to practice yoga and meditation deliberately, consciously, not just seeing it unfold in my life spontaneously as a result of Kundalini. But it seemed like the natural expression to say, wait a minute, then people are suffering. The bottom line on these kinds of traditions and practices is how do we get out of suffering, both individually as well as for all humanity? And the part of me that was very much interested in being socially engaged, that felt no, distinction between living my spirituality in a meditation room and sitting on a meditation cushion, or standing on a picket line, or getting arrested, standing up against racism on campus, to later on teaching meditation in prisons and hospitals, that these were ways to be engaged and take what I had been given and was unfolding for me through meditative practices and the awakened Shakti practices that just naturally and spontaneously occur, and say, how do we live this into the world? How do we give this away? That's really been the teaching of all the great spiritual traditions. That was Buddha's path. That was Christ saying, don't keep your light under a basket. You got to shine it into the world. So being able to translate what we're experiencing on these more and more encompassing levels of consciousness, encompassing with love, encompassing with compassion, encompassing saying, I don't want to see any being suffering. Well, then I have to do something about that as well. So it's part of to me, it's a natural part of the transformative process that unfolds through spiritual awakening and unfolding, is the ordinary ego mind. Well, it's being refined, it's being transformed. It's not just here to serve its own, desire in the moment, its own want or need in the moment. And those desires become the desires for the good of all, the awakening of all, the upliftment of all, the flourishing of all. That these also become expressions of what our divine self is inspiring us to do.
Okay, so I'm going to jump into it and ask a question that comes to mind, which is, let's say you're coming across people from all walks of life are having spiritual awakening. So in 2024, it seems to be a growing phenomenon. First of all, for people who are, let's say, beginning to integrate the process, they're watching this podcast, what would you advise them, or is there any kind of thoughts you could give about finding a calling? That's my first question. And I'm going to add a second question. Have you come across people who've had spiritual awakenings who have callings which might be at odds with your calling? Which sounds a bit strange, but what I'm really asking is it possible that spiritual awakening can itself be polarizing? So two people have spiritual awakening, they come across each other and they're not necessarily working. And I've got a bigger question, but I guess that's my first question.
Right. What was the first part of the question? Because it went on for a bit.
Sorry. What advice would you give people about finding a calling? So they've gone through an integration process.
Yeah, sure. It's the foundational kind of context for all of this is you go deeper and deeper listening. Part of what the process of Kundalini awakening, or just call it the power of consciousness, because that takes it out of just a Hindu yogic paradigm, the unfolding of greater consciousness, and how do we integrate that? Well, and how do we explore that? Well, a lot of it has to do with how do we go beyond the ordinary mind, the conditioned mind. That conditioned mind, what's it conditioned by? Family, culture, religion, politics, all these layers upon layers upon layers of beliefs, old structures in our psyche, old models that we weren't even conscious of, how mom and dad related to each other and what that implanted in us about, what's men, what's women, what are roles, all those things in terms of opening up consciousness, they all get re-examined because so many of them were not reflective of the wholeness, the completeness of individuals. And so listening more and more deeply and being able to discern the difference between what's the ordinary mind's, ongoing narrative or ways of interpreting reality and what's a deeper truth, what's the quietness. It's why going into stillness and quiet is so important as part of the process, because we need to be able to get away from, the blah, 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 from the ordinary mind that is just, again, reflecting old past experiences and hammering current experiences into that so it can stay comfortable, so it can have an explanatory framework. One of the big challenges about an awakening process is because it's not ego-driven, it often freaks people out. There's suddenly processes going on. It might be movements, it might be insights, it might be emotions that the ego mind didn't say, I think I'll do this today. And so its whole paradigm of it being in charge of day-to-day, moment-by-moment activity of mind and body is fundamentally challenged by awakening of consciousness. The draw that consciousness, this awakening power, is pulling us towards is more and more expansive and more inclusive and more held in a context of this loving awareness. And so when you look across traditions, the fundamental aspects of that huge, the transcendent, boundless consciousness is loving awareness. It embraces things lovingly. So people will differ in the phases where they are in that kind of unfolding. And to me, that's what comes up as differences, or somebody's, gets really identified with where they are in their awakening. And that becomes the reality, because that's the nature of mind. The mind takes what it's experiencing in the moment and projects it into the future. And so it sees, I had this experience. That's it. People have a near-death experience. I saw God, and this is God. This is what God says, and you should believe it too. Yeah, that was a good experience. Now, what's the larger context for being able to hold that, to understand it in a much broader perspective that, again, doesn't create divisiveness, doesn't create for and against?
Yeah, that's a great response. So I guess what I want to ask in the context of, let's say, collective spiritual awakening, spontaneous collective spiritual awakening is there, if we were to extrapolate what's happening, we have, let's say, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people that we're coming across who are having spiritual awakening. And if they all go through an integration process, theoretically, there's going to be a calling for all of these people.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you suggest was happening? Is there some kind of map or meta map or something going on which is going to enter into the social or political or economic sphere? And when we come together, so myself, yourself, Alan, and others, and we're interacting, I guess the question is that this kind of loving awareness, this kind of harmony, how can we practice that so that we can work well with each other? We can interact, we can create institutions, organizations, but with this new kind of, let's say, awareness, this loving awareness that you say, what do we have to hold so that we can create these new spaces?
Yeah, that's a great area to explore, because it's requiring, as you can see, skills that weren't necessarily developed in the old paradigm of divisiveness, of one up, one down, of the paradigm of domination, exploitation, control that has dominated Western psyche for eons. And so we're trying to throw off eons of conditioning, and that's going to require being able to be patient, being able to see, oh, what cultures have developed this better? What about there's a whole paradigm about nonviolent communication, of getting really conscious about the impact of words, the impact of emotions. What are they doing to each other? What are microaggressions? These are all things to then become more and more mindful of, because now they're valued. You see, once you start to say, oh, being able to work cooperatively, being able to work together, that we can all flourish together, now we're going to start to see, oh, there's other dynamics we want to cultivate. Not, oh, no, the paradigm should be, I step on you and then I get up higher. Then that engendered lifetimes of dynamics that we're done with. We're destroying the planet from that perspective, and each other. So a lot of it has to do with then bringing again this kind of consciousness. You see the way the great Buddhist master Thich Nhat Hanh brought, just a simple message around breathing and peace and being able to walk that into the world. And he did it. He lived it. He walked into, the midst of conflicts in the Vietnamese War, and brought that transformation of consciousness. Hard process, not a quick process. So it calls on us to, just as in the hero's journey does, part of the thing that we note in the hero's journey, whether we're looking at, it through the eyes of Luke Skywalker or some other figure, the challenges demand that we reach for inner resources and cultivate certain virtues, strengths, capacities that we might not have if we hadn't been in that vice of those challenges. We're in that vice now. The challenge for humanity is the old paradigm of that survival of the fittest. I mean, extrapolate that to what we have as the paradigm of domination, exploitation, and control. That worked for a select few, especially, and for a certain period of history. Now we're confronting problems that it's going to be the collective working together in harmony, saying, wait a minute, we can all flourish. We can't have oligarchs with all this wealth hoarding it, and then 98% of the population is scrambling to stay alive. That does not work. And so the cultivation of that kind of understanding, saying, okay, then for us to work together, we have a conditioned mind that says, oh, I got to get my way. I have to assert my perspective, even in spirituality. Wait a minute, I had somebody call me, a Swami. You're not Hindu enough. If you studied with me, I'd make you a real Hindu. And I'm going, that's not what this is about. It's not about trying to become an exemplar of a past paradigm, of a historical perspective. What's alive now? Where's that grace? Where's that perspective that says, wait a minute, there are no others? The ultimate vision that flourishes from this consciousness is there are no others. So we are each an emanation of that. And we have a way of serving that loving kindness, compassion, creative perspective in the world here now in our lives. We have to listen deeply so that we're not just being driven by the conditioned mind, our own or others, and saying, oh, no, you know what? You're not being successful doing that. You should be doing this, then you'd be successful. There's so many different ways that the cultural norms and the currents of, you know, whatever the fad is in the moment will take people away. Getting rooted in what's the deep, profound truth of we are one, we're in this together, and it's time for us all to flourish together. Bring out your unique gifts of creativity, your unique gifts of how to empower others. And it might be your calling is to work with relationships. It might be your calling is to save, you know, a particular botanical species. The callings are so wide and so varied. We all have a place to be able to listen to that and say, oh, and it's held in this context of I'm helping things to flourish. I'm creative. I'm a part of that awakened process that is now trying to manifest a whole new paradigm.
Can I just ask a question? I mean, in that it seems, I mean, we don't know definitely, because it could be just because we have better communication, but it seems that more and more people are having these, you know, spiritual awakening experiences and processes. And it also seems that the as far as humanity is concerned and its effect on the planet, it's coming to a pinnacle. All these years of, you know, illusion of separation and the planet, we're pushing the resources of the planet. And so do you think there is a connection between those two, in the sense that there is a need for people to wake up now because of we're coming to that crisis point? Do you see those two things as being connected?
Well, there's a synchronicity to them. You know, that's Jung's term for a non-causal connection, and that they're coming about together. I think we can see from, you know, certainly my background, many others working in the field of awakening in all manner of forms, that it's often pain, it's often trauma, it's often profound challenges that pushes our mind, our consciousness, beyond the paradigm we were caught in. And that's often part of the hero's journey, is that, oh, you know, some hero's journeys start with an abduction and you're pulled into it. Some are, oh, I think I'll do this, but oh my gosh, I didn't know I signed up for that. And now you're being pushed. But the push, the demand, the threat is often what propels our consciousness to look beyond the conditioned patterns. It keeps coming back to what's going to drive us beyond the conditioned mind. And part of that can be just one's dedication. Maybe you didn't have a lot of trauma, but you're really dedicated. You have an intuition, because the intuitive faculty gets this. And so we can start to say, wait a minute, my intuition is this is the absolute antidote to suffering. This was Buddha saying, I have to find the antidote. And then, having found it, I have to spend the rest of my life trying to teach others how to find it for themselves, within themselves, as themselves. And so the paradigm exists. How we flesh it out here and now in our lives, that's what's unique and creative. That's why you're unique and expression of the infinite creative dynamics of consciousness. And we then can bring that to the fore and support each other in flourishing in those ways. So I think there's a connection between how dire things are looking and then people saying, oh, this paradigm isn't working. I have to look beyond it. And it's often the pain and the suffering and the threat that makes us go, I have to. Well, that's because the mind likes its comfort zone, and it doesn't abandon it, often without kind of a kick.
That's very interesting. I want to tie it into something that I think we may have touched on in the last podcast, or at least spoken about briefly. It's that many people who have spiritual awakening come back and they mention this idea of unity consciousness or some kind of idea in the future there's going to be a kind of it's perceived oneness.
Mhm.
And I guess what I'm asking is obviously that's an idea, it's a concept, but is our activism, is our socially engaged spirituality, is it a form of activism in order to create this idea of unity consciousness? Do you feel in your experience that that's the end of the hero's journey? So whether it's Luke Skywalker coming back, defeating Darth Vader, for example, or it's in Lord of the Rings, they're getting rid of Sauron, right? You know, Sauron. Is there some kind of is there an idea that's coming to us of an idea of peace on Earth? And is that this, although it seems remote and it seems very strange to talk about it, I'm just trying to link this idea that I've felt this as well, and I've met others who felt it. Is there something that we are trying to pierce and bring into consciousness? Something about an idea of unity or oneness? And how does that actually make sense in a world of duality, and the world where we interact with duality? You know, and I'm not sure that question makes sense, but that, you know, if it doesn't, let me know.
Yeah. Well, my sense of it is that that sort of teleological notion of where is this going and what are we being drawn towards and working towards. You know, it may start out for a person, they heard about that there's a thing called unity consciousness. Maybe they had an intuitive experience of it. Maybe they had a peak experience and had a one-off kind of experience. But it said, oh, this seems like the most important thing, and I'm going to try and move towards that. Collectively, that's happening as we start to see, just in terms of how do we live it into the world. Yes, the highest understanding of it is we're all one. We're all one now. That's not a future experience. That's the truth here and now. What's in the way of experiencing that is the fog of the mind. So that's why it's both an individual practice to clear that, and then it's saying, oh, having cleared that, I see that everybody's suffering this, or 98% or 90% are suffering the same thing. How do we support others coming to this kind of understanding and knowingness so that we can live together in community that it really supports all of us flourishing? So on the one hand, I think it is part of an ideal, and to say that, oh yeah, this unity as a concept could be made real by really transforming. Well, we'd have to transform our economic system. It's based on competition. Capitalism grew out of slavery. We just shifted it to economic slavery so that the owners no longer even had to provide housing for their slaves. Well, you know, we've got to change the system. It's the wrong system. It doesn't promote that kind of cooperation, that kind of collective flourishing. So it's going to be social changes, economic, political changes that are going to take a long time to be able to generate.
But so then, if we were to dig into that a little bit more and say, okay, let's just assume that there's a growing number of people having spiritual awakening, a growing number of people having peak experiences where they come back from that peak experiencing, talking about the notion of collective unity. They integrate their experiences, go into the real world, and they start forming socially engaged spirituality where they're making changes in their community, their family, or bigger. Now, if we begin to dig into that, how does that look potentially? You mentioned about land rights, for example, or property rights. Is there anything that you particularly feel connected to in terms of, well, here's how I think we might start to reorder the system to make it, to be able to reconnect with unity again? You know, let's talk about a social change. What are the areas that you feel personally connected with, and what other ideas, let's say, to begin with, that you would suggest would be a great way to start working on this? I know Alan's got a few ideas here, but
no, I just wanted to chip in, really, just thinking about what could be the first steps, in a sense, if you had any thoughts on that.
Right. Well, Yeah, because the foundation is personal transformation. So we have to become steady and grounded in that perspective. Then we're going to say, how do I apply it in my life? Um, I've worked with people who were, big in the finance world. And as their shift in perspective, their internal experience changed, they changed their investing perspective. Um, and so it came from the inner realization that, oh, I don't have to just exploit and try and get, 20% return on my money or 25% return. I could dial that back. And in the process, help, this mental health institution or this chain of hospitals or some other sort of way of investing that was going to support what they were investing in operating better for more people and being in healthcare, and doesn't have to be as profit driven. It's not going to be suddenly all of a sudden we're going to go, oh, we don't want profits. That's not going to happen. It's going to be, how do we mediate this? How do we ameliorate this? How do we dial it down so that it's not the polarity of this huge discrepancies? And that's, I think we have to move in these kinds of doable steps with a very long-term view of how do we create equality, equity in this world. But we are so far from that. To just start to bring greater compassion, greater understanding, shifts within economic models that say, wait a minute, we can share. I don't have to just exploit everybody. There are companies and leaders and CEOs are saying, no, I share all the wealth of the company with all the employees. That's a step forward. So we have to look at what are the doable steps that make sense in the here and now that are being informed by this sense of how do we move forward in a way that supports everybody.
Makes sense. Alan, do you want to have a continued question?
I suppose a related question is that I remember Eckhart Tolle saying that as more people awake, as there's more awakening, that on the other side, the forces on the other side of the coin also become greater. And it's become very clear that othering has become worse and worse. I mean, it's obviously incredibly clear in the United States and elsewhere. But have you any thoughts on again first steps to reduce the othering? I guess, yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Perhaps?
Right. Well, in part, we have to be conscious of that othering serves certain people, and it serves them economically. And so we see that, people who are caught in an old paradigm, not awake at all to their divine nature, they're caught in that domination exploitation. It's either I'm going to come out on top or I'm going to come out a step down. Then they just want to come out on top. There's that kind of level of conditioning that goes with it, from a spiritual perspective, a completely diluted sense of self, completely diluted. However pervasive that delusion is, it's still a completely diluted sense of self and what well-being is. And they've been empowered over, hundreds of years to be able to accumulate that power and wealth and defend it, right? So yes, we have to confront that and begin to be able to look at on a ground level as people practicing nonviolent communication. They did it in South Africa and went in and worked against apartheid and worked to be able to try and open up dialogues and say, wait a minute, how are we together on this? It's the Dalai Lama's message. Listen, everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to be free of suffering. How can we agree on what are next steps for bringing that about? And so there's ways that we can start to try and understand what is the individual's needs that have gotten so polarized, but there are genuine needs in there. this goes into, I think, part of what Jung talked about in terms of shadow work, and that we have to work on the collective shadow. That people who are expressing, for instance, in the United States, the divide, the economic divide, the social divide, but under as there's pain, the sense of powerlessness, the sense of not being heard, the sense of being sidelined, and you see that. I see that in so many people on the right wing, screaming about that and thinking that the strong man is going to stand up for them, even though he's just another deluded character exploiting them for everything they've got. They so need the emptiness is driving such profound needs that it can seem like they're going to be answered by just another delusion. Well, we have to be able to slow down and go, oh, that takes deep listening. That takes really being with people and hearing what their pain was. Where is it coming from? How can it really be resolved? How can those needs be met? There are real legitimate needs in there. How can we answer those? So I think there's a deep listening. There's got to be the willingness to meet people on that level. When I was going into prisons and teaching meditation, I was dealing with people who had violent pasts, murderers, drug dealers, gang bangers. I mean, all kinds of people. You know what I found? They all just wanted to be heard. They wanted to be acknowledged. They wanted to have their innate value reflected back to them. And that's a profound connection that then happens. And if you can create the moment, the safe environment where people can let that guard down a little bit, might just be a one-on-one, might be just a small group, but that's where we have to do that kind of shadow work to transform individuals and groups.
Doesn't that mean that on a ground level, to meet people where they are, we have to let go of our own ideas of what's right and wrong, what's true and false? We have to open up a dialogue with people who have a different view to us and try to understand their perspectives from where they're at. But that also means a step into the dark, a step into a place that we might feel very uncomfortable. But and I, linking this to spiritual awakening, my own journey, I had a non-dual experience, and when I came back from it, it completely reframed the way that I viewed people. It showed me the opposite of what I thought was true, and it made me sit with that for many, many years. It's a pattern that's happened in my life, and it helped me shed layers of ego. But I guess what I'm asking is I couldn't have done that without the experience of non-duality, that everything is interconnected, that we're all conditioned. How do we even bring this into a world now where thought forms and patterns and duality are where people feel most comfortable with? Because that's the status quo that we're existing in. And what we're talking about are words and experiences. We want to now, if we want to try and bring this into a more mainstream space, how are we even going to begin to do that?
Right. Well, when you said, well, we have to let go of all our values or ideas in order to meet someone, I don't think we have to let them go. We have to be able to say, I'm not here to convince them of my values. I want to hear what their needs are. And I'm holding it in the light of, this is a divine person. This is a divine emanation before me. No matter what they look like in prison or in a hospital or wherever it was, this is an expression of the divine. Where are they on their journey? What are they confronting? What are they struggling with? Where's their pain? What are the needs that aren't being met? I think it's that kind of genuine level of hearing and being with somebody that we then connect as humans, saying, oh, I care about what you feel. I care about your pain. I may not have a solution. I might just be able to be just another compassionate ear, but I want to try and find solutions. I want to understand what might help your life change for the better. And yes, there are individuals that makes no dent in. When you're dealing, as part of my clinical background, you can deal with psychopaths and sociopaths, and they don't have that kind of capacity for relating. And that's why we still have to contain people who are a danger to themselves and others. But for most people, if we can sit and open that space repeatedly, because there's so much distrust, there's so much pain, there's so much anger, there's so much otherness. There's the automatic response is, you don't understand, you haven't walked in my shoes, you're not my life. Well then, yes, it's absolutely true. I haven't. I can't imagine what you've been through. Let me be with you. Please tell me about that. I want to know. You're my window to be able to understand that. That's part of how we become expressions of this loving consciousness that wants to meet everybody. Embrace them in that loving consciousness. We become in service of that. We enter these spaces in service of that.
I think from what you just said, I've just taken a thought. I think this is part of what you're saying, that actually when people are doing the othering, it's their fault. It's their fault. It's in a way, it's an expression. What they're doing is an actual expression of personal pain, and I think that's a very helpful thought, because when people are othering and maybe say outwardly racist, and those kind of thoughts come out, which can be quite hard to tackle. It's a helpful thought to think what in one way what they're doing is they're expressing unprocessed pain.
I mean, it's a part of many traditions. It's a very explicit part of the Buddhist tradition. Well, we'll talk about the afflicted mind. Everybody's mind is afflicted. Until one is free, you're dealing with an afflicted mind. An afflicted mind, that means it distorts. It's driven to avoid pain, seek whatever limited pleasures in the moment it can find. It's all driven by an afflicted mind. Now we can say, oh, I like your affliction better than I like your affliction, but that's just more BS for the mind. The afflicted mind is the afflicted mind.
So what comes to mind when you say that? And what comes, I don't want to bring politics too much in this conversation, but I look at, let's say, the state of my country, state of your country. There's a lot of polarization. And I just see afflicted minds all over the place. It doesn't matter whether it's left or right.
Yeah.
It feels, because behind what's being said, behind the policy, are people who seem to be stuck in a mindset, unwilling to dialogue, unwilling to go into a place which is uncomfortable and try to understand the other perspective. Whether or not the other perspective, let's say, is right or wrong, because that's an objective truth. I don't want to step into an objective truth. Subjectively, we all think we're right, and we think the other person's wrong. So it does begin at home, and as you said, it begins with personal work. So I wonder, what are the techniques that you've learned personally through your own journey, and that you've experienced that help people to help one like myself or someone else step out of their shell and engage with somebody who has a completely different mindset and you might be at odds with, but rather than compete with them, we want to start collaborating with them. What techniques or what advice can you give?
All right. Well, to me, it comes down to meditative practice, because that's what transforms what's going on inside of us, our own afflictions. Because what you're talking about is, okay, I'm going to bring my afflicted mind to this interaction. I can't control that person's afflicted mind. I have to deal with my afflicted mind. And so that means I have to, in various processes of meditation, contemplation, dialogue with others, begin to really question all these patterns of conditioned reactivity that are so automatic. What is it that suddenly gets my, ire going? What is that irritability? What is that reactivity? Because fundamental across all the yogic, Buddhist, spiritual practices, diminishing reactivity is really critical. We know this sort of neurophysiologically, because reactivity is what, Daniel Goleman coined the term amygdala hijack. Reactivity is when that sort of subcortical structure in the brain that has to do with fight, flight, freeze takes over. our higher order thinking, our frontal lobes literally start to go offline. So if we can't start to diminish the reactivity, step back from it, see it, be able to contain it, be able to ask ourselves, now, what else? What else is going on there? How else might I look at this? How did Buddha look at this? How did Shankaracharya look at this? How did this author, that poet, what are the other perspectives? The ability to entertain different perspectives, contemplate them, is part of the process of being able to alter those conditioned patterns and the conditioned reactivity that goes with them.
Yeah, I guess going back to what you were saying earlier, when you said rather than let go of what you believe, when you meet somebody who's got a different opinion, you almost have to hold two completely different opinions or more simultaneously. And I think that seems to be where all this is going, is can we sit with more than one uncomfortable difference of opinion or truth and be okay with that? And it seems that seems to be very difficult for many people.
Right. And what we see is, I wrote about it in my doctoral dissertation. I used Daniel Kuhn's work on the structure of scientific revolutions, the ability to be able to hold these different patterns and be able to see that one paradigm may be subsumed by the other, that it's larger. I mean, Ken Wilber did a lot of talk about that in his work, and that many of the existing paradigms, well, they make sense within that paradigm, but the structure of them creates opposition, creates otherness. And then we're coming along with a unity paradigm saying, oh, we don't have to do that. But the person who's looking through the eyes of the original paradigm saying, you're full of crap. We're not all divine. That's not going to happen. You don't give that up to meet them. You go, tell me more. What makes you think we're all a piece of crap? Let me hear that. Oh, let me enter that reality with you. Let me say, I had that experience. I might share how I walked out of that, or what things impacted me that shifted my perspective on that. So we have to be able to, like you say, hold both the all-encompassing paradigm that's awakened and not use it to hammer, denigrate others holding other paradigms. We're just seeing. That's why the Buddha, who was like a medical practitioner, said there are afflictions. You need the right medicine to get out of that affliction, to cure that affliction. The afflicted mind needs to encounter these higher truths, needs to encounter, what is this loving kindness? What is this compassion? It might just be your patience and compassion with that person may be so novel to them, it makes them start to question. They've never experienced that before. I saw that in prisons where I walked in and, literally an inmate who was serving life for murder, had these transformative experiences. And later he said to me, I've been told what a miserable shit and a fuck up I've been in my whole life. And I have been. I'm horrible. I deserve to be in prison. He said, but you came in and you told me I was divine. You looked at me like that. And you gave me practices. You gave me these things. I had no idea what a mantra was or all this stuff. I started doing them just because I got nothing else to do in prison. So I went to my cell and I started doing them. And the whole perspective started to change. All because it started out with just somebody came in and treated him differently. He said, at the end, he said, I'm freer now than I'll ever be, right? He said, the guards are going to tell me what a shit I am and what a fuck up, but I don't have to believe them anymore. And I don't have to fight it because now I know the truth of who I am. What a profound change.
I think this is really useful on a micro level, in a sense that, say from a personal level, I have a very good old friend who has, as she's got older, she's become more and more othering, and she holds some very difficult views. And I see that as being her pain being expressed. So I think this is an important part of the conversation. But just to open up the conversation to somewhere else, talk about first steps for positive change. And I think we talk about the micro interactive level in our everyday lives, how we treat people. Have you any thoughts on the more macro level? To use one of Samir's expressions, shifting the over to window in the sense of how can these experiences of unity conscious come from the very fringes of what's seen as being acceptable and normal, more into the middle of the window of what is normal. Have you any thoughts of steps to move that perception?
Well, I think what you guys are doing and others, and any way I can participate with other groups is being able to say, oh, look at, people look at me. I've had people say, you're a PhD and you've been on the faculty of a medical school for 24 years and you talk about these really wild things. It really makes me stop. But that's good. They made him stop because it gives it legitimacy. I don't think it gives it legitimacy, but in the eyes of somebody who's looking for the trappings of legitimacy, or that, that it's integrated, it's lived into the world. And, here's a person who lives in the world, has a family, had a profession, had a career, and has this kind of view, so that we can show that as more and more people are awakening, it's not the people whose boundaries were already a little loose. And so they were open, wonderfully open to spirit and to transcendence and things. But then maybe they didn't communicate it with the kinds of boundaries and the kinds of clarity that helps other people go, oh, that's possible. So this ability to say, no, we have all these varied expressions. Somebody else might go, oh, he looks like a stuffed shirt. I like seeing somebody who's dressed like this and does all these other things. That speaks to me. They're great. Yes, all of them, all the different wonderful ways of expressing this transcendence and how it opens our heart and we live it into the world. That's what's going to help people get a sense of, I can do this. I can relate to that. Because that's what it keeps coming down to.
Just following up Alan's question and this idea of making these concepts more mainstream and what you're saying, would you say that looking at say 1960s and 1970s and the coming of a new age movement, and then following that, people like yourself and Bonnie Greenwell and Yvonne Cason in the 90s and late 90s came up with the Kundalini Research Network. Do you think there's already been, or there already is, there has been a counterculture movement that has brought these ideas already into the mainstream, and now in 2024, they're just bubbling underneath? Do you feel that work's been done? A lot of that work's been done, or do you feel that work has to be done now?
Oh, more and more. I mean, I remember when I was applying to graduate school, and I mean that was in the 80s, and even back then, one of the places I was looking at, I might go into business administration and healthcare administration. So I applied to a very conservative sort of business school, Wharton, and at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I got interviewed, and they go, "We would love to. You have an extraordinary background." He said, but the one guy said, "I'm not sure you're going to be happy here. We'd be happy to have you, but this is a very different paradigm." He said, there's people who are on the fringe, and then there's people who are on the fringe of the fringe. He said, you're on the fringe of the fringe with your perspectives. Now, given your accomplishments, we would take you in a heartbeat because we think something would come creatively out of that. But will you be happy? And that was a great question from him to me. And I went, there's this other program I think I'm going to be happier at. And I went to the other program. But that bringing it into the mainstream, it's, we can feel like we're in a bubble chamber because we talk to a lot of people who are transcendentalists, who speak the language of spirituality and awakening and maybe Kundalini and Buddhist concept. Oh, but so much of the world is not there at all. Not at all. Oh, look what's going on in the Middle East. Look what's going on in Ukraine. Look what's going on everywhere. Now, does this need to be more and more spoken about, more and more people invited? It's an invitation. It's an invitation into, wait a minute, there's another way of doing this that will relieve suffering much, much more effectively than anything you've done to this date. So we have to sell it. We have to sell it in terms of what are people's needs. How is it going to meet their suffering where they are?
I mean, yeah, so that's a great place to start this movement into the mainstream. And when I look at that, I look at the correlation between things like mental health in the West. I look at the West, for example, because the data's in for the West, and the fact that there seems to be the idea of GDP per capita, so the amount the country earns per person, and correlate it against mental health. You have at the top of the chain, you have the USA, high GDP per capita and very high rates of mental health issues. So in the past, one would have thought that greater GDP per capita would alleviate mental health in the country, but it doesn't seem to be that happening. So people aren't happy. People aren't necessarily being happier the more that they have material wealth, right? So I think the more that comes out, the more that we need to look at alternative ideas, because something seems not to be working. And I think, so where are people at the moment? Well, there's high rates of obesity, high rates of mental health issues, high rates of inequality. So there is a kind of, I would say, a rage to some extent in many societies that hasn't been vocalized, but it's been vocalized, let's say, politically, that people aren't happy. They're not content. So there is this kind of unhappiness that is going through the nations. And I'm wondering, so something is happening, something is quite clear, that wealth does not necessarily bring happiness, material wealth doesn't do it. But from a kind of political space, there is nothing being offered that is, let's say, in the mainstream. There might be fringes offering it. And I guess what the next question would be, well, how do we get from the fringe? How do we bring these ideas more into the mainstream? What is the place that we can meet people? What is it? What are their current needs? Is it about happiness, mental health, inequality? What are those needs that we could start to talk about?
Right. Wow, those are big topics, big questions, because you're talking about the existing political, economic, social system reflects domination, exploitation, control. The idea was if you could dominate more, you were going to be happier because you were going to accumulate more of the things that would make you happy. Then even as people accumulate more, they're not happy. And in fact, one I think can easily argue, and many have, that process so alienates you from your true self that the mental health outcomes of being split off, of having to produce products that are going to fall apart, of having to treat others as commodities and try to rip them off. These are so self-alienating, so create such a fracture within an individual that meaning and purpose, value, all start to get muddied and people get lost. And so they're in pain. They don't know. They were told if they did this, they'd be happier. They're not. When I was running a private psychiatric institution in Connecticut decades ago, there were people who were clients who were very, very wealthy. It was a private psychiatric treatment center, and their families weren't happy. The kids weren't happy. They had unbelievable wealth, and it was very clear none of that met their needs for just being heard, for being touched, from being loved, for having a parent who cared about them and was trying their best to be attuned to their emotional needs. So yeah, the questions you're raising are really bringing into focus how destructive the dominant paradigm is on all levels. It's not just destroying our ecosystem, it's destroying people's connection with their own self. And then they act out of that alienation in violence.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, sociologically speaking, in sociological theory, there's this concept that the economic system actually produces the knowledge or the culture. So the culture springs out of the economic system. So, in this system, the need to consume, acquire wealth, these ideas are part of the system, and it's argued that these ideas came about partly because of the system. And there's historical evidence that, say, for instance, in the early 19th century, factory owners employed people to change the culture of the workers so that they would have this idea of working hard for a fair day's pay, or those concepts. They weren't there in the first place. Do you think that there is the possibility of actually changing the economic system through changing the hegemony of the thought, the ways that people view the world? So, in other words, if there's an increase in consciousness, could that change the economic system? And again, if so, what might be the first steps? Again,
right. Well, I mean, I do think it can change it, but it means entering the halls of power. Because if the people in power of the economic and political systems are still operating under that paradigm, then all we feel like is awake victims. And okay, I'm awake, but if you can't buy what you need, you can't earn what you need, you can't do what you need because of that system, then people have to be able to get into places of power to be able to shift that. Now there are things, like eco-villages, people trying to create eco-villages within cities and within communities, to both promote a more ecological understanding as well as a community understanding. And that's great. And they become like little islands of cooperative community living. Fabulous. Now, who's going to run to be, the local representative in Congress, or who's going to go from there and become a senator? Who's going to go from there? Because we have to look at, we have to be able to take these shifts in consciousness into places of power and be able to operate from there.
So, following on what you're saying, what Alan's saying, and what you touched upon earlier with things like truth and reconciliation, truth and reconciliation in Africa. A couple of words spring to mind, and I tend to try to avoid these words because I think they could be termed airy-fairy, but I think love and forgiveness seems to be understanding, let's say. These words seem to represent a thought process or an experience that can move through these patterns or afflictions, as you said, and help progress people. So, for example, and in leadership, you have Nelson Mandela, you have Gandhi, you have Martin Luther King, who were in some ways flawed, but in other ways, they were leaders because they forgave their oppressors, and many people followed them. And through their examples of forgiveness and love, I think less blood would have been shed. And then in Rwanda, there was truth and reconciliation because 800,000 people had murdered another million people, and villages that had to live together with different tribes had to work out a way without sending everyone to prison. So truth and reconciliation seemed to have worked. So I guess within these ideas that you're suggesting, there is potential for real social change. But then the other question would be, well, is there a reason why it's not natural for us? It doesn't seem natural for us to move to that point. We need an amazing leader, or we need a massive problem like a genocide to happen for us to even contemplate it. Why is it not easy or natural for us as a society to move towards love and forgiveness as just ways of being? What is our social construct block, whether it's energetic or physical? What's stopping us from going to that space?
Right. Well, there are many things, but two things that stand out for me is one, is the nature of how our nervous system evolved. And when we're talking about the fight, flight, freeze response, and that, again, Daniel Goleman coined the term amygdala hijack. It takes those higher levels of consciousness or understanding offline, because now I'm threatened. If I'm threatened, it looks like it's going to be either me or you, and I don't want it to be you. So that's why, all the fundamental starting practices in spirituality have to do with self-regulation skills. How do you breathe and let go? How do you calm your nervous system? How do you not allow amygdala hijack to happen so that your innate capacities for being able to see unity, see solutions, not problems, see connectedness, not just otherness. Well, that we have to dial down that reactivity individually and collectively. When that happens, yes, then the innate capacities for being able to shift happen. But what blocks them also is the conditioned mind. The paradigms that say, no, my system is better. I want to dominate your system and take it over. How are the Chinese dealing with Tibet? Well, they just want to exploit, dominate, eliminate. They want to literally eliminate. It's genocide, right?
So
they have no motivation to go in and say, I want to hear, I want to listen.
So that then, well, there are two questions that come out of it. The first would be, well, all things being equal, and suggesting that from a spiritual awakening perspective, everything's connected, then why are we built with a flight or fight mode? Because everything is connected, so there has to be a reason for it. So if the end is unity consciousness, there has to be a reason for our flight or fight mode. It can't be an accident. So what's the purpose?
It's not. And when it serves the purpose of preventing me from, getting run over by a car or getting in the way of a danger that I could foresee and jump out, that's all good. It's that it's triggered so often by other things that have nothing to do with the threat of life and death. We make it the threat of life and death by our identification with a social system, a value system. And then if you don't stand with me against blah, 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 then you're my enemy. I mean, that's all the conditioning that is then setting all those triggers off. So it's both a deconditioning process, because that's what meditation is. It deconditions the mind. And it's an expansive process of saying, oh, in the absence of that conditioned perspective, what's possible? What can be known directly? What can be known intuitively? What have the great beings in the past given words to in terms of trying to express what this state is about?
Well, then the question I'll ask you linked to this is it possible that suffering has an evolutionary purpose? Our suffering collectively, individually?
Oh yeah. I mean, my opinion, my humble opinion, yes.
That's a very good question to me. Just to supplement that question, just to add to it, we see things in a binary sense, good, bad, dark, light. In that sense, perhaps trauma is not bad. It's something else. A teacher, perhaps. Would you view it as that's a potential?
Well, so when we say, okay, suffering has, fits into our evolution, it fits into our evolution if, in the highest sense, if we are able to bring consciousness to the suffering. To suffer unconsciously is just to suffer. If we bring no consciousness to what caused the suffering, what are the internal causes, what are the external causes, how did I participate in that? What can I be empowered to change about that? So suffering is feedback. We have our sensory system is a feedback system. It says, oh, this feedback tells me that's edible. This says, no, that's poison. So it's part of the feedback system. But too often, suffering goes into the unconscious and just becomes an unconscious drive to either avoid or go towards something else. So it's bringing consciousness. It's always about bringing the light of consciousness to conditioned patterns, conditioned reactivity, whether it's suffering, whether it's joy, happiness. that isn't automatically okay. That's why, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, when he talked about thought waves, he said, there are those that are neutral. There are those that, can bring about suffering, not happiness. Joy was something that arises spontaneously from your true nature. That the ultimate joy, the ultimate source of that is unconditioned. It's a state of being. Mm. So thought waves can be painful or non-painful, but joy, oh, that's uncaused. That's what was so striking for meditators, all meditators to this day. They go and they find joy arises uncaused. Love arises uncaused. I'm not loved because I'm loved. I'm not happy because I'm just happy. These are very different experiences, and they help to decondition that whole framework that says, go after this because it'll make you happy. Avoid that because it's going to bring you pain. That whole paradigm starts to shift.
I guess if we try to link all these things together, what we're saying is, we're conditioned beings living in a conditioned society. Then there's this phenomenon of spiritual awakening that helps us get glimpses of an unconditioned space. And then it changes us and we come back into society and we feel that there's something about this unconditioned nature of reality that's more true. And we're trying to bring it to the rest of the world, which to some extent is conditioned, and we're still conditioned, but we're, let's say, a little bit less. And now, let's say that we're mixing in the world, and we're talking about today and the future. What is? I mean, I guess what I ask myself is the nature of reality isn't what I see around me. Definitely true for my spiritual awakening experiences. There's something else happening, but in the reality that I exist, that I perceive, everything's an effort. Everything takes time. Everything takes money. And I know that, you might say, well, who is the person saying that? Is that you or is that your conditioned self? I understand it. But my conditioned self is the self that interacts in this reality to some extent, because if I have to interact with somebody else, I have to go into that particular mindset. So how can we, as people who live everyday lives, take what we've learned from spiritual awakening, take what we learn from the books that we read from you? How can we, and I understand you mentioned meditation, but going past that and living everyday lives, what advice can you give us? How we can try to be a bit more authentic to ourselves in our everyday interaction with people in our everyday lives, whether it's paying taxes, driving the car, being with a family member who we find difficult, or having conflict with somebody on the street, just for example. What can we do?
Right. Well, there's no beyond meditation. So I'm going to just take issue with that, to go beyond meditation. It's how do you live meditation? Yeah. Meditation is a state that transcends and subsumes the waking, dream, and deep sleep states. To become established in knowing that and being able to live that, because that's the perspective that sees no otherness, sees unity all the time, all places, no matter what you're doing. It's the ordinary mind that gets caught up in its structures of beliefs about itself and others that springs up as soon as you open your eyes in the morning and well into the night. So to me, the meditative practices lead to the meditative state. The meditative state is the lasting antidote. Holding, once you start to have some experiences, like you've had unity experience, then we have to, when we're more identified with the ordinary mind in our waking state, we literally have to do the practices. Practices are nonstop, because the way the mind works, the mind is sort of binary. You're either practicing going towards the perspective and holding that of unity, or you're practicing divisiveness and something else. So moment by moment, to be able to hold that awareness means to be able to say, even in terms of changing our thought forms, oh yes, I'm feeling threatened with this person. That's engendering more otherness, and that otherness is a negative other. I'm watching that. So in that moment, the witness is the expression of our state of equanimity, our state of meditation that's trying to infuse the moment with that greater awareness that says, no, you're not just those reactions, and they're not just who you are seeing them as in this moment. So it starts to deconstruct the automaticity of what we think is natural. Natural just means it's been so conditioned it went unconscious. And now we're just living that out. So the practices are so profoundly demanding because they are a moment by moment questioning of the ordinariness of the mind and the automaticity of its reactions and its projections of other and all that goes with it. That's what we have to do very concretely, moment by moment. Practice is an every moment thing. A yogi doesn't practice, for an hour in the morning, an hour at night, or go for, 500-hour training. It's continuous, because consciousness is continuous. The flow of consciousness is continuous. What's going to contain that flow? What's going to direct that flow? What's going to clarify that flow? That's staying awake, staying aware, practicing.
That makes very good sense to me, and that actually just everyday living is a continual practice.
It's the hardest practice. I mean, it's why in old more ancient times it was thought that householders couldn't attain the highest states. It was too demanding. So you got to reduce the demands. Live in a monastery, live in an ashram, live in a cave. Much fewer demands. Now you'll be able to deal with this wild runaway mind. But that was nonsense. And the perspectives evolved past that and said, wait a minute, we're either living this all the time or we haven't completed the process.
Alan, do you have any more questions?
I think for me is the I understand the in a way the everyday every minute practice and how that makes sense both for the person themselves and actually how they may affect other people in a positive way. I think I think that is important. I think if we were to think about ourselves as what was the original phrase, social activists or
socially engaged spirituality.
There we go. So going back to that, I think every day, almost every minute living, especially with others, that is practice, and you can see how that can make a difference. I mean, I suppose what I personally struggle with is the more global aspect of, and I see, that humanity is like lemmings running to the cliff, and it troubles me, and not just for the human's sake, but for all the destruction of extinction of other species and destroying beautiful environments. And in my mind, I see spiritual awakening as being part of the solution. But I personally grapple with how that can be done on the more macro level. That's macro level rather than mackerel. Anyway, and I just I know you have touched on this, and you obviously talking about having more spiritual awakened leaders, but have you any other thoughts you could add to that? How on a more macro scale we could make a difference?
Well, I think that what we're doing individually is what adds up to changing that macro level. We're not empowered to suddenly go, okay, I'm going to change the economic system of the world. The mind can say, I'd like to do that, and it can get attached to that and then it can get frustrated because that isn't, and that need and that desire isn't being fulfilled, and then it can go down the tubes with that. So the same processes of seeing, okay, what is that? But to me, there's a much more profound level to this, and that's seeing that when you start to shift and sustain these deeper states, you also start to get access to a whole different vision of the unfolding of reality and the evolution of humanity, consciousness, beings across time and space. And the snapshot of the ordinary ego mind and what it finds to be suffering or pleasurable, that informs the individual mind. But awakening is also awakening to much bigger levels of what's this evolution and how we're participating in that, and how we as individuals, carrying our little candle of light into the world, well, that light spreads. You know, if you go into a dark room with a candle, it makes a huge difference. Just one candle. So we start to be able to also see and have intuitive, visionary experiences, transcendent experiences that help to inform the ordinary mind and say, okay, I'm playing the part that I'm meant to play. That the highest calling of a human life is to know the infinite as ourself and as all beings and all creation, and to serve that with every breath. These are the two great callings. The particulars of how you're going to serve, that's going to be that beautiful creativity unfolding as your unique expression of the infinite as the divine in this time, in this space. But that calling of know the highest and then serve it, live it into the world, that's what transforms. That's what we see. Buddha didn't set out to say, just, oh, I'm going to show away. All I can do is show away. That's what Christ tried to do. That's what Shankaracharya tried to do. That's what Gandhi tried to do. I mean, it's trying to say, I'm going to live it in the context where I'm given, because that is a divine context.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah, I think Lawrence, I think it's a great conversation. I think there's a lot we spoke about, but I think we'll end it there, and then hopefully, we'll have another conversation about similar topics in the next year or so. I just want to take time to thank you very much for giving us his words of wisdom. It's an important topic, and I think as we go through our journey, these questions will become louder and louder, which is, well, how do we take these practices into the real world? But as you rightly said, it's got to begin within, and it's got to begin with ethics, getting our ethics right and getting the basics right. And without that, you can't create real change.
Yeah. And aligning our actions with what we profess to value, right? Because that's what makes the difference. You can say you value this, that, or the other thing. One thing I've done in teaching meditation, I say, think of what's most important to you. What's the most valuable thing in the world to you, in your life. Now examine your day. How much time and attention did you give to that most valued thing, person, object, whatever it is? Because we have to be able to translate what's really valuable into what's our actions throughout the day. What do we give our time and attention to?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, look, thank you very much, Lawrence. It's been a really great conversation. And we're going to put in the description a link to your website again and your books. Is there anything else you want to say before we go?
Yes, attention, attention, attention. It's all about attention. We've been giving attention to these various topics and trying to illuminate them. All the meditative practices are based on attention. They're based on being able to manipulate and regulate and expand attention so that it begins to be unbounded, meaning it's getting set free from the conditioned mind. Our attention goes through the patterns that the conditioned mind runs it. But all the great mystics of all the great traditions say, oh no, that attention, that awareness is all encompassing. And it is suffused. It is inseparable from love. The mind is what creates a difference between love and attention, love and awareness, love and knowing. That's because the mind is fundamentally divisive. For the truth of who we are, for the truth of what our infinite nature is, love and attention, love and awareness, they're one, and they flood all that is.
That's great word. Yeah, that's a very nice way to finish it.
Yeah, agreed. All right, thank you again. And I hope to see you soon. And we'll always stay in touch, Lawrence. We really enjoy our conversations. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
me too. Me too.